Welcome back to Next in Leadership, the podcast. Next in Leadership, I remember when I was first early as a leader. And what is Next in Leadership? That's what we all want to know. I was chosen as a team captain as a junior for the wrestling team in high school. And when I was in high school, I thought, wow, I'm a leader. And you know what? That leadership journey could have ended when that season ended. However, I recognize this is something I'm interested in and something I want to develop. That's what we do here. We don't let your leadership journey be circumstantial or end when the season ends. We want to build on top of that. So that's our mission. That's why it's important. We're going to help you develop your leadership skills so you can apply that in any area of life. And so how do you do that? You find us on all the socials. You circulate us with our friends. Tag others who you think would be willing to develop. We're at Next in Leadership. Also, you can go to our website, nextinleadership.com. What I would recommend is filling out that quiz. I can assure you, in high school, my answers would have been different than they are now, and that is a way that I can measure my leadership journey as I go back and reflect on the things that helped. So we're back in studio, as you can see, and this week the podcast will be yours truly. You can't miss out. You got to see it. It'll be so much fun. I don't even know what it's going to be about. That's what makes it fun. Neither one of us know. And so it will be released on audio podcast on Tuesday mornings on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. The video podcast will go live at 10 a.m. on Tuesdays. You can't miss it. But what you're all here for is my rant. Reed's Rant. Reed's Rant. That's what everybody comes for. And so AI, there's really two sides, and I'm going to give you one that you may not have thought of. Everybody thinks it's artificial intelligence, but AI can stand also for authentic interaction. And so whether it's artificial intelligence or authentic interaction, you may know what I'm going to pick, authentic interaction, 100%, that's the side I'm choosing. And so why? Because in the age of artificial, authentic is even more valuable, right? As artificial intelligence is there, we're already questioning, was that written as an email? I read an email and I said, someone just put those as prompts and sent me an email, spamming all my socials. They didn't read my book. They didn't listen to my podcast. They had AI do that and send me an email thinking they're going to sell me something. However, what I'm looking for is an authentic interaction. And so actually what I literally do right now is I said, perfect, email Courtney, who's my assistant, and she'll get you on the calendar so we can have an authentic conversation. And you better not show up as an AI bot, but ultimately that authentic interaction. And if we look back at the most valuable relationships we have, right, those are authentic relationships. We aren't going to ask, hey, will you marry me, ChatGPT? No, you want to have an authentic relationship with a significant other so that you can marry them, right? And so those are the most valuable. Now, the question is, well, Reed, AI has taken over us and you can't ignore it. You're exactly right. So what do I use artificial intelligence for is to accelerate authentic relationships. So, for example, today happens to be a family member's birthday. So artificial intelligence will remind me that, hey, I've curated this. I've seen their socials. This is somebody that's in your contacts. Of course, I know it's that my children's birthdays, but that artificial intelligence can aid that in the process. They can let me know, and what do? Instead of prompting an AI-generated reply, I call them authentically and notify them, say, hey, happy birthday, what are you doing today, right? And then recognizing that activity. And so it is 100% authentic interaction. And in fact, I even take it a step further. If there's a standard prompt, right, that I think others would ask, just because they might authentically ask that, I'm thinking of a new way to phrase a different question. And that's where the value is. And so in authentic interaction, artificial intelligence can only be above average because it's taking the above average information from everything that it curates with that answer. But my choice in life is to be exceptional. And if I want to be exceptional, I have to make exceptional choices. And exceptional choices would include saying things or doing things that others wouldn't do above average. And now that might be uncomfortable for many of you. But I'm not here to live a comfortable life. I'm here to be challenged and challenge myself. And so that's why I chose the side, authentic interaction. That's much more challenging. It's a lot easier to feed it through a prompt, send that to your friends and family, and hope something sticks. Or even to prospective owners. But I'm going to go have an authentic interaction and develop those, so build those skills. And so now the intro for this week is Jason Hart. And Jason Hart is the co-founder and CEO of Chariots for Hope. And he's got such a great story because he had a franchise concept in that space. And through that concept, he decided to sell his, repair place and get into a Chariots for Hope business. He formulated his LLC And Chariots for Hope is an organization that donates vehicles to those who are transportation challenged. And so we, as an organization, donate our vehicles, or franchisees have, and for transportation purposes, so that those can be reconditioned and then redistributed to people that need that. And so Jason's story was great. And as you see him pivot from the business world over to a philanthropy, you can see that he leads with integrity, curiosity, and humility. He's also in partnership with his wife. And if you had listened to a previous Next in Leadership, you heard her side of the story. I wanted to have them separate, and then how they can work together in tandem. And it really instilled listening and within the culture. And so you can hear his story. It was a great talk with Jason, and I hope you can enjoy learning his ways of leadership as well. So enjoy. Welcome to the Next in Leadership, the interview. Today, we have Jason Hurt. I'm excited to have him share his story with you about his career background and the philanthropy he leads. And so, obviously, Jason, in the Next in Leadership interview, we start always with kind of the beginning of the leadership journey. So, as we orient ourselves to the audience here, what was an early stage of your leadership journey that kind of helped you identify that maybe you've got some leadership traits that you want to build upon as you've built your career?
Absolutely. Well, Reed, thank you for having me. I really am excited to have the conversation, so I appreciate it. For me, it started back with my family, probably. I grew up in a family. I was very fortunate to have just leaders around me everywhere within the family. I had grandfathers and aunts and uncles and father and a mother. And so I was able to go ahead and grow up and just be exposed to various different types of leadership styles, management styles, but most specifically my father. My father was a CEO of banks his whole life as I was growing up. And so just a man of his word, faith-led leader, filled with integrity, great work ethic. And so I just remember at a very early age being in that household and seeing him lead. I may not have quite been able to articulate it, but that's the man I wanted to be, right? Not uncommon. I mean, a lot of kids want to be like their dad, but he definitely was one. And so at first it was for the wrong intentions. I wanted to have the authority. I wanted to have the power, the money, the title. But I would say it was about seventh grade when I started realizing and started understanding what leadership is and seeing the impact that my father had, not only on the community in our home and the people that he was leading and serving, but also their families, what his leadership was doing and having the impact. And so I'm like, man, that's what I want to do. That's what really started this whole thing. And so I built my whole life around that. And so I started really capitalizing on the opportunities to sit down. And within my family, I had good and bad leaders.
Yep.
But I started going ahead and I just started asking questions and learning and just shadowing them and doing as much as I possibly could. And then I went outside the family once I basically exhausted those options. And I have a lot of friends that basically said, hey, Jason, they know my story. You grew up in a family of leaders. I'm not a man that likes excuses. And so I can tell you that I have some people that are actually my mentors that never had a father in the home and that they didn't have leaders, but they sought them out. And they were aggressive and intentional to make sure that, okay, I may not have had an easy road like you, Jason, as far as having them right there in your backyard,
Right.
but I knew where to find them.
Yeah, and I think the leadership journey is great that you could have that in your household. I think it's super, super critical and valuable. At the same time, as to the point you're making, is there's people that don't have fathers. That kind of led to your philanthropy, quite frankly, that probably are not the same stable environment. And I remember being early in my career, I said, you know what? I had a stable family environment for the most part growing up. And then at the same time as, I wanted to, really invest in that. But I realized there's so many people that don't have that. And that's really where the Next in Leadership comes from. And I know your philanthropy at the same time is saying, hey, one, we have a responsibility to lead our families well. And your dad clearly took that upon himself and led you well. And likewise your family. But second, there's other families. We're all created equally, right? And have different starting points. And so our job as people that have maybe made it progressively as a leader, and that's really what there's Next in Leadership is. I think the other thing that stood out to me was every person I've interviewed for this is curious. And I think if you're a leader listening, you are asking questions of the extended family. I think, if you're just there, we can be entitled or we can be curious.
That's right.
Right. Entitled means we can receive what your dad is likely had a relatively good childhood upbringing, financially, at least, being the CEO of a bank. You can be entitled to that, or you can be curious how they achieved it.
Right.
And I think that is a choice a leader makes early on. And clearly you made the choice early on to say, hey, how did you receive this? Not, it is mine as an inheritor of your wealth or your knowledge or your lot in life. I mean, we all genetic lottery were born into the families in the country at the era that we were by God's providence. And that doesn't mean that we're entitled to those riches. that
Mhm.
means we're created on purpose for a purpose, and that was great early on. And so, what are some
Mhm.
key takeaways that maybe your family imparted on you early in your leadership journey? And clearly, people saw things in you that ultimately led to leading yourself well, or that you learned as you began to start leading self.
Yeah, I would say first and foremost, it was and being in the networking world and being able to sit down and have these type of conversations with a lot of people. This is a struggling skill for a lot of people is listening skills. And my
Mm,
dad was a listener. He sat down because he cared about the people. There was a level of authenticity, still to this day, that I've never experienced that I have
mm,
experienced with my dad. And so he got down and get into these relationships, and he went into into that conversation wanting to understand where they were coming from, whether it was a problem, whether it was a coaching that needed to happen, so that he can go ahead and help them create a solution and get out of it. And so he was an amazing listener. And so he stopped, he let them talk, and when he was done, then he would talk. So many times we get into these conversations now, and you can tell people are already formulating a response before you're done with the first sentence. And so I just remember that, like, man, I want to be a good listener because at that time, and I think most kids aren't, I was a horrible listener.
yeah.
And there was so much information that was coming my way that I just didn't absorb because I wasn't listening. And so I just saw that and saw the impact and how far that really took him in conversations and very difficult situations.
Yeah, and there's skills. I mean, we go to I think of all the growing up, it's like how to communicate, how to
Yeah.
speak from a main stage, but we never talk about how to listen. And,
Mm,
the listening, I always tell people, when we speak, and even as you have heard and watched some of these next in leadership interviews, I'm listening to the audience. The questions are the same, but the audience is what makes it different. And so my
yeah.
first thing when I study is I study the audience. Who am I talking to? And what are they trying to accomplish? And I think that's a key trait we need to develop as leaders is understand people come to leaders to help them lead along a path they want to go.
Yeah.
Right? We're not following a leader to lead us the path we don't have an inherent desire to go. We're going to quit that at some point. We're going to realize, wait a minute, I'm heading the wrong direction. I'm done. And so
Yes.
our job as a leader is to listen. That's what your dad was great at. And in the right
Right.
role, that skill elevated there was to
Right.
listen to where they wanted to go and then say, how can I help you get there?
Mm,
And ultimately, I think the other step of that, and I know this is again part of your philanthropy, is if you can't help them get there or the path they want to go is not the path you want to go, that's a choice then we can make as a leader.
right.
And we invest in those who want to go down the path we're looking towards. And it starts with listening to pair. Because if we inherently, so maybe I'll ask you the question: what is a trap that you've seen or your dad was averting by listening that otherwise could align you with someone that wasn't going to go the right path? And because I think to your point, and I want to settle on this for just a second, is if we don't listen, we can be in the wrong place. If we listen well, we can put ourselves on the right trajectory. And so, is there a point when we're listening well that can either set us up to not have greater pain later or ultimately accelerate the direction we intend to go? Have you seen anything like that in maybe your career or life that listening trait as a leader, super critical, has helped you?
Yeah, I would just say personally, when I'm sitting down, I mean, that's the first thing that I do whenever there's a situation is sitting down and really listening. And then what I can tell you one of the things for me is just because sometimes I'm listening, but I'm not really still receiving and I'm not understanding. And
Mm.
so we're making sure that once we sit down and they're explaining the situation, the circumstance, that then I'm repeating myself and I'm not immediately jumping back into a solution and then assuming that I understand. And so maybe I'm taking a couple extra steps towards the approach, but I just want to make sure that there's clarity and that there's, understanding. And so sometimes I'll summarize it. And I've seen you do that on this podcast, and you are. I mean, that's the first thing. Just because it's embedded in me is that, man, you stop, you're listening, you're intentional, you're engaged, and so whenever they're done, whenever one of my employees was done, I would reiterate, I would summarize to make sure, am I understanding this right, instead of jumping right into the solution.
Yeah, I think that's phenomenal because we're listening. And then as a leader, we listen for the intent to redirect or direct,
Right.
right, towards the direction
Right.
we're heading. And that's part of the leadership role because, there's a lot of listeners, and I think we got to segregate this because I think leaders get confused with it. We can listen with empathy and sympathy and then
Mm,
reinforce them in the same hole,
right.
or we can listen with empathy to lead them out of it. And
That's
that's a
good.
trap, right? I mean, a leader can decide to listen with empathy and reinforce where you're at, or listen with empathy and lead you out of it.
Out
And
of
then
it.
it's the person's choice to make that decision afterwards. And so clearly, that's something that you've learned from your dad and developed, and now you're
Mhm.
leading others. And I know, again, in your philanthropy, that's something you're listening to their place in life, and we're trying to redirect to say, hey, what can you do from here? Not what got you here,
Right.
right? Because empathy is truly how do we get you away from here or to the direction you want to go, instead of sympathy is saying, hey, that sucks where you're at, right? I mean, that's not where you
Right.
want to be. And so then you're listening with empathy. Now you're leading others. And as you began to lead others, what are some early learnings or things that you picked up along the way that would be insightful for the audience as they're listening to maybe first take their first step into leadership, and maybe they've realized I need to develop my listening skills and or any traits that you've developed that has helped you lead others?
Absolutely. I would say a couple things that stick out in mind as far as leading others. And first, it's getting to know your people. And so a lot of times when I'm sitting down and I'm interviewing, that comes out in the interview, but that's not enough. I want to know my employees better than they know themselves, better than their mothers do, their fathers do. And so we have follow-up meetings that are just intended to do that. I need to know what drives you, what motivates you, because I care. And I'm never
Right.
going to get you to where you need to be if I don't understand who you are, what, like I said, what your interests are. So I spend a lot of time in getting to really know my people. And it comes from, you can't, manufacture this, but this is something I learned from my father as well. But it just really does come from an authentic place. And you really want to do a self-assessment to make sure that it's coming from the right place. And so I get to know my people. And then once I do, you're setting the expectations. I mean, you have to be very clear and that they need to understand, what does winning look like at Chariots, at Geico, at Signal. They need to understand those expectations that, hey, this is what our mission is. This is why we exist. This is what we do. This is how we win. And this is what happens if we don't perform. And having those discussions up front, a lot of times there's a negative connotation with performance management. That's a big tool in my tool chest, but it doesn't have to be negative. Like, I'm here for you. I want you to succeed, and you need to understand what we're going to do and the steps we're going to do to get you to where you need to be. And so, having those clear expectations, I tell you, really does eliminate, and making sure they understand that, hey, is there anything that we just talked about that is unsettling to you, that you don't understand, and making sure you address all those things up front, and then being engaged. Reed, is just not sitting back and managing from a computer. Is going out there. For my field of work prior to Chariots, I was out in the field a lot. And so I need to make sure that my people see that I can do the job. I know the job, that I understand their struggles. And so I'm going to get out in the field, and I'm going to put a lot of time outside of the computer to make sure that I understand their market, their location, and their challenges. And then well, not finally, but also the recognition piece for me. I'm huge in celebrating wins and recognizing good work, good behavior, good performance. And so we always would build this recognition system that people feel valued and that they were celebrated. And it was a contagious culture for sure. And then finally, I talked about it a little bit, but I would say when leading others, it's performance management. Sometimes you got to get to the point, make the hard decisions, go through the coaching plans, do everything that you need to do to try to get them to win. But if they can't, then you have to make the hard decision to find a new role or get them out.
Yeah, and I think you start with first. It's not. I think that the trap a lot of early leaders have is I've studied your experience, but I don't know who you are. I got your
Mm,
degree, I got your
mhm.
GPA, I got your major, I got your favorite sports team, but I don't know who you are. And I think we don't want to miss that. Is you saw what drove them, right?
Right,
And you looked at who's inherently your personality and how's it driving you. Number one. Then
right.
number two is, do we have you in the right role for that? Is it aligned with what we're
That's right.
trying to achieve? And then you're listening to align. Then once you've
Yes.
aligned that, now you're setting expectations. You're clarifying to say, okay, we've aligned. This is what you want to do. And now I'll set clear
Mhm.
expectations. And it's you had a clear statement in there that I want to repeat, which is you're doing it for their benefit, not for yours. I
Right,
am helping
right.
you get to where you want to go. So you listen to who they inherently are. They have career aspirations, right? And those can be
Mhm.
varied, right? Some people just want to have a place to go and be at a good culture and contribute and get
Right,
compensated. Some people have aspirations to replace you at someday, right? And so that's
right.
you understand where they're at, and then you have clear expectations, and then you performance manage, right? And there, I think
Yes.
as a leader leading others, we don't take those three steps, the first three, and then we fail to do the last two, which is hold accountable to that performance management, right? We may say, hey, I got
That's
to
right.
know them. I placed them in a place they want to be, and I gave them clear expectations. But then it
Mhm.
gets a little more difficult at times. We're like, hey, you know what? You're not keeping up to that's performance management. You went back to that twice. And
Right.
hey, this is performance management. And it's not just the stick, it's also the carrot. I reward you. Right.
That's
And I
good.
think we only have credibility as leaders when we both hold accountable and
Mhm.
recognize.
Mm.
So if we
So good.
recognize the reward, but we don't hold accountable, then they will be running to any recognition that isn't necessarily there. If we don't
Right.
hold, if we hold them only accountable and don't recognize their successes,
Right.
now they're
Yeah.
going to run away because they never get any praise. And so it's a balance of two. However,
Yeah.
neither of those would work, reward or recognition, or accountability, without first knowing who they are.
Oh,
You authentically
a-
care. Second,
absolutely.
clear guidelines and responsibilities. Two, performance management to achieve that. Three, accountability. And then fourth, of course, recognition. And it
Yeah.
carries you going forward. And so there was so much in there. I wanted to break it down in a practical,
Yeah.
applicable sense, because if
It's
you are an
good.
early leader that wants to do that and you don't have all five of those steps that Jason just articulated, that's going to hold you back for years. This is just so
That's
much
right.
knowledge and base. So ultimately, as you've led others, what are some challenges as people might be trying to walk through those five steps, as you kind of articulated, that you've seen that otherwise would just be early cautions, or things you maybe can lean heavier into that might have a greater effect, or things that may have been harder for you to learn along the way?
Yeah, some of the challenges I say with going through those processes is just that, is caring too much. I mean, you
Mm,
start basically, and I mean, you start befriending some of the people that you work with, and you start thinking beyond
yeah.
mission, you start thinking beyond core values. And so that's a trap that I got into, is just like, you've got obviously people that come and they're good people, but maybe their strengths don't align properly with the role. And so you're shifting your head and you're overlooking that because you've developed this relationship where maybe it's beyond professional. And so I found myself, just because I am a relational person, not as much as my wife, but I am. I think I'm more of a hybrid. That I truly do care for my people. And like I said, that was something that I would struggle. And I would say, learn how to figure that out, where you can set the boundaries and manage within those boundaries so that you're not compromising, any one of those steps.
Yeah, and I think the definition of friendship should be clarified, right? Because the friends we really want around us are those who hold us accountable, right? They're the ones that are really going to make
Hmm.
us better, and also recognize
Yep.
our achievements. And so, those are things that within that performance, right? So if we walk through those five things, they're things we would want from a friend. They understand who we are because they listen empathetically, right? There's
Hmm.
clear understanding of the relationship we have with them. Maybe they're a golf buddy, or there's somebody that's there. And then there's accountability, right? Let's use the golf analogy as an example. Hey, your buddy tells you had a bad shot. They're holding you accountable, but they may recognize you had a good shot, right? Those are
Right.
friends. And
Right.
then at the end, if you win, you might recognize that they won or you won, or things of that nature. So those are friends. And
Yes.
why is it any different in a work environment, right? And of course,
Right.
there's their career and their compensation is there, and so we
Yep.
need those people that are there. And I recognize that I've had friends that have come to work at Signal, and one thing I think is,
Hmm.
as we're bifurcating that, is I say, hey, I am holding you accountable as your boss, but there also is, we have to bifurcate that. And if you can't bifurcate that in your mind, it
Right.
won't work for either one of us, because I have to do that in
Hmm.
my own case, right? And I've had times
Yes.
where I've had kids and even family members come into it, and I say, hey, I'm your father in one instance, but I'm also the
Mm.
boss here. And so understand that line, because there's a
Mm.
huge benefit to that relationship, because there's inherent
Yeah.
otherwise trust. At the other
Yes.
side of that, there's a lot of, and I want that trust. But if I can't hold you accountable, it won't work,
It
right?
won't
Because
work.
it won't. And it
Mm-mm.
actually, what I've learned as a leader, and I'm sure you can experience this too, it actually hurts them more,
That's right.
because the peers believe that favoritism, it actually works dramatically against them.
That's
And
right.
it actually undermines your leadership, but to a greater degree, it undermines their effectiveness. And so I communicate that right out of the gate up front. And so I
Yes.
completely agree with you. And then now, as you expand leading others well and learning those principles and having that process, how does that impact the organization that you're leading, or leading an organization? That's the third step, right? We're leading a handful of people that are around this, so we might have a direct relationship, but now we're leading an organization. So what are some experiences, Jason, that you've had leading an organization that you would impart wisdom along to the audience that's listening?
Make sure your people know why you exist, right? I start with mission
Mm,
clarity. There's been so many departments and teams and organizations that I've been a part of that they don't know where they're going, and it creates
mhm,
confusion. And so I can tell you this, that every one of my members at Chariots, they know our core values, they know our mission statement, they can recite it. You need to know who you are, what you're doing, and why you exist. And so I would just say, start there and making sure that, and don't do anything else. Sit down, even if it's just basically role playing and test playing. I mean, you just need to make sure that they understand where you're going. And so I would say then from there, for me, one of my biggest strengths at Geico, when I was in the corporate world, I traveled a lot. And one of the things, I certainly had my weaknesses, but one of the things that I think I was recognized for was creating culture. And
mm,
it's such a word that we throw out there and it's easy to say, but it's something that I would go in there and I would immediately establish a healthy culture. And if they didn't have one, it sometimes it can take several several months and sometimes years to go ahead and rebuild and make sure you have one. But I would say establish a healthy culture, understand how you do that, get with people who have done that so that you can lay the groundwork immediately, right? Decision making, communication, work ethic, just everything that goes in. I mean, at the end of the day, culture is how we do things, right? And
Mhm.
so you just want to make sure that you've established that. And so I would say really spend some time, read books, with a mentor who has done that, who has been there, that understands how to create a healthy culture. And then for me, I would say this: as you are growing and as you're growing in your leadership, I had to move from relational to systematic leadership. I always
Mm.
say it's a lot easier to manage systems and processes than it is people. And so you
Mhm.
want to make sure that you have the right processes in place, get them, put a lot of energy, a lot of effort in making sure that you've got those systems in place that are going to get you the results. And then making people follow them is a lot easier. And so sit down, and as you do grow, it can't, like I said, my wife, you have to have that relational piece with you. I'm not saying to eliminate that, but as you do grow and you do scale, you really do have to make sure that structure's there, that intentional execution happens. And then finally, well, I wouldn't say finally, but there's a lot of things, but I'll just throw a few out there. I would say just learning how to be comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Mm.
And so there's so many times and so many decisions and, uncomfortable moments as a leader of an organization that you're going to face. And so you just have to understand how to navigate through that and be comfortable in those moments. And so just really kind of avoiding hard decisions, decisions will slow everything down for sure. I also say this: I say, making sure, and I just got this from my father, and I'm not saying that that's the only form of leadership, but just always remain in a posture of humility and being coachable.
Mm.
Things change constantly. And I can tell you, it's easy. I've been guilty. And so I'm not going to throw stones, but it's like you start getting into a situation, an environment where you have moved results and you've made some things happen. And you start thinking, even if it's passively, I'm kind of important around here. I'm doing some good
Right.
things. And you're just going to miss a lot of opportunity. I can tell you, pride really is a very destructive thing. And so I would say just keep your pride in check. Have people that you really trust, that you can surround yourself with, that aren't what I call puppets and just going to sit there and say, yes, men, but that they're going to hold you accountable. They're going to come at you in a very constructive way, and they're going to call you out when you need to be called out.
Yeah, and I think you start with that culture. I think it's super critical, and pride will erode culture, right?
Mm,
Usually, that culture, if you have somebody that's proud, they're going to orient and break away from that person anyway. And so, even as you start a culture and you take over a team, I'm sure this is the case. Is that there were sometimes it's addition by subtraction. You don't realize,
yeah.
okay, first step as a leader taking in that role is who is disruptive to the culture I'm trying to build, and
Yes.
how do I find someone that will be additive to it? And so you
Mm,
take a piece out regardless of their contribution because as they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So if you have a disruptive culture, it doesn't matter what the strategy is, because someone's going to derail you from that. And that's a key thing of a piece. I also have watched you, and you talked about mission and values. I've watched you communicate that. And as leaders, we know it so well. We feel like the audience should, but you
yeah.
communicated at every opportunity. They've been there for some awards and different things. And it's not just
Mm,
communicating it, it's demonstrating it and showing the impact of
mm,
it. I think
that's
that's how
good.
culture resonates. So
That's
many
good.
times we get it to recite by our team, but they don't
Mm,
demonstrate it like, hey, we're
yeah.
giving away a car. And then we don't see the
Yep.
impact of it all. But you guys do a great
Mm,
job of that storytelling because, again, if
mm,
our culture and values are only said,
yeah.
but they're not showed, and then the impact or result is not communicated, then we lose it. But if we feel it and we see that, person driving off in the car of Chariots for Hope
Yeah.
that is on the
Yep.
award side, even though you're saying it on the front end, and I think credit to you because I've watched a lot of philanthropies and we support obviously
Mm,
Chariots for Hope, that
yep.
they just collect the money with a story. Their mission and
Mhm.
vision is like, hey, give us money and then we'll go do these things with it and then have impact. We can't tell you
Mm,
what we did with it, and we can't tell you the impact, but
right.
we have the mission and vision super clear, and I communicate that all the time. So
That's
that is
good.
super important.
Yeah, so
And then
good.
ultimately, the next step that you talked about is that culture. And then I think the other thing I heard in there that I think is super important to highlight is relationships break down without structure at scale of an
Mhm,
organization, but they
mm,
also with structure, you have the ability at scale to have relationships. Because it's not
mm,
about what we're doing, it's now again a relationship. Whereas if you have 100 monkeys running around, right, just
yeah,
that arbitrary thing, it's hard to, or
right,
cats or whatever you want to communicate, you can't
right.
organize that, right? And I remember watching this one time, and it was super interesting. I mean, imagine a field of cows. We're in Nebraska here, and how do you get all these 1,000-pound cows on a truck. And what they do is they bring in the fences, and the fences get
Mm,
tighter and tighter, and they're single file, and pretty soon the whole truck's loaded. I'm like, wow, that's amazing.
wow.
They don't have to push a single one. One farmer and a little sheepdog or a dog can go herd them right onto the truck. Why? Because that's a system.
System. Yep.
The fence is trained to get them all lined up and head in the right direction, and then everybody's happy, right? And I think that's exactly the way a structure and
Yes.
system is, and that farmers relaxed. They're like, "Hey, hey." Whereas you see one cow running without a fence, they're freaking
Right.
out. You know what I mean? Think about that. Think
That's
about that.
good. No,
That's the
that's really
analogy, and I
good.
think we think the relationship is
Yeah.
better without structure. It's the exact opposite, and I think that's an early
Yes.
trap. The structure allows you to have a relationship because you understand that role. And so
Yeah, that's
maybe
good.
speak a little bit about that, how you've seen that over time, once you establish that structure and you get people a culture aligned with it all, it actually makes everybody fun. It reinforces the culture. It's kind of a perpetual cycle from there. So have you seen that where once you establish structure, the relationships improve dramatically going
Oh,
forward?
big time. I mean, absolutely. And that's, for me, I mean, personally, I mean, and again, we get as a leader get to enjoy the benefits and the promotions that I received is because the people that basically were underneath me that followed the process that we finally put in place that
Mm,
worked. And so they start seeing it and they start believing in it and they start having obviously confidence. And then you're seeing wins and you're seeing more wins and you're seeing that they're getting promoted and their families are basically experiencing that. But you have to have people that also see the vision. And it's going back to being
mm,
able to clearly communicate that this doesn't happen overnight. I'm not saying that it can't. I've been part of some teams. I mean, that's also an excuse saying that, hey, look, this is going to take some time, but it's based upon the circumstance, obviously the location. But they have to understand the vision. They have to understand that we are going to fall down. We're going to scrape our knees. We're going to experience some losses. But once we get this process in place, and I think historical data is huge, right? I'm able to show them in other markets that this is a process that we put in place. This is what happened to the people that were following it. And so you're bringing in real life stories and real life impact and what happened. And then once they get that buy-in, which is a big corporate, important word, but once they get that, they believe in it, then they're going to go ahead and they're willing to go ahead and lock arms and make, have some losses, experience some fall downs, as long as they can see that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And so, yeah, 100%. It's that clear communication and making sure that they get the buy-in. And then once it's contagious, because once one wins from following the process the way that you've taught them and coached them, then the others they're going to want to jump in and start doing it as well.
yeah, and again, we're creatures of habit, of course. So we get in the habit of losing, but we get in the habit of winning, right? So
Right.
it's our job as leaders to make sure we can get them in the habit of winning, and that winning is following the structure established. Of course, there's adjustments that we made. I mean,
Yep.
things happen over time, but at the same time, is then focus forward instead of looking at who to blame is the other key part of that, and that's what builds culture. So
Mm,
obviously, you built a organization and have had career success throughout the time, leading self well, and a lot of that's that
mm,
empathetic listening, maybe you learned in the household, and then applying that to establishing vision and mission and values and culture and living that out day to day. And then as
yep.
you lead others, you put structure in that enhances those relationships. So,
Mm.
really, where do you see your leadership journey going from here, Jason, as you've really built and established those processes?
Yeah, no, great question. I would say that, my next step, and I believe that God's opening up a door for us as far as chariots is we've gotten so much interest because there's not a lot of ministries that are doing what we're doing. And so we've received lots of feedback from people outside of Omaha that want to bring a chapter of this type of ministry into their city. And so for me, it's multi-state leadership that's new to me. And so it's going back to saying, hey, look, I don't care. I'm curious. I'm open. I'm going to start aligning myself with my mentors that have been there, that have done that. Start reading the books. I'm going to start putting in the work that I need to do to properly prepare our organization to move outside of Omaha. And so we started that. Our first chapter outside of Omaha has been up and running now for 3 years in Wisconsin. And so it was a pilot program.
Hmm.
And man, again, this is going back. And I don't know if I talked about this, but just embracing mistakes. I know this sounds weird, but I love making mistakes, Reed. I
Hmm.
don't like doing it twice though. And so
Yeah,
I want to go
exactly.
ahead and I want to make sure that if I'm making a mistake, I know that I'm learning. I know that I'm developing. And I even document my mistakes and I go through, if you will, like a debriefing session with myself as sort of what happened, what needs to change. And so we had a lot of that first stage. And so I realized at that time it's just kind of again a self-assessment that I tried, and sometimes we fall back into some of our habits and we're like, man, why did I do that? I gotta have more people around me that have done it. And so that's kind of the next steps for us is we're excited about that because we have built a model that we think is going to be scalable. But now it's for me, it's kind of taking back, tabling it until I get more knowledge, education, and understanding of what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. I'm excited to see you kind of continue to expand your organization and the impact you can have, across the country, hopefully. But I think another thing that's resonated with me as I've done these Next in Leadership interviews is and every leader has an ability to self-evaluate and not
Mm,
self-aggrandize, right? That's pride, but
mm,
self-evaluate and say,
right.
hey, the world is saying this. Now, some may be true, some may not be true, but I'm going to balance the two and say, what can I, change or learn from that mistake? And they run
Yeah.
to mistakes, they self-evaluate and they don't excuse it. And that leads to the leadership journey. And so as we wrap up this interview, what is some closing words or just a sentence that the audience can take and apply today to there that you would love to impart wisdom? Any final thoughts you'd like to impart in the audience?
Yeah, I would just say, as you're going through this, stick with it. But two words that stick out in my mind, and I love the story of McDonald's, but consistency and discipline. I would
Mm.
just say stick with it, be consistent, don't give up, continue to go ahead and learn. This is an amazing podcast. Like I said, I've listened to every episode, Reed, and I mean, you're on to something, and I just really enjoyed it. And so just embrace yourself in these type of podcasts and masterminds and webinars and books, and just be consistent with that. And there's going to definitely be some times that are going to come your way. They're going to be very discouraging. You're going to want to give up. And so that's when you need to really have a group of good supporters around you that are going to be cheerleaders, promoters that are going to lock arms with you and continue to help you move forward. But be consistent and make sure that you have the appropriate discipline. You don't have those two things, then you'll never make it.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of leaders. None of them said I was the first to quit, had zero discipline and I was inconsistent. So that's why I'm a leader. No one says that. So I think it's so true, but overlooked. And I think if we look at the alternative, no one is in a form at the finish line because they quit. Right?
Right.
No one is at the finish line because they weren't consistent. They're
Yep.
all there, and then it's just to what degree were they consistent or disciplined? And as we
Mm.
enhance those skills in our lives, that's great. So, Jason, thank you for helping me with this episode of the Next in Leadership, the interview. It's been great to have you. I think there's some great
Yeah.
nuggets that team can take from this. And so, audience, we look forward to hosting you or having you listen to this and providing feedback, and then releasing this with you in the next couple of weeks. So, thank you, Jason, and have a
Thank you.
great rest of the week.
Thanks a lot, Reed.